Melissa never planned to direct anything at the local community theater. Her days were already packed teaching drama to teenagers at Oak Ridge High, where she had built a reputation for bringing out the best in even the most reluctant students. But life has a funny way of pulling you into things you never saw coming. It was a chilly Tuesday evening when her phone rang. Melissa was curled up on her couch, grading student monologues and sipping tea that had long gone cold. "Hello?" she answered, not recognizing the number. "Melissa, it's Rick from the Community Theater Board." His voice sounded strained. "We have a situation." Rick explained that Patricia, the director for their upcoming spring production of Second Chances, had fallen ill. Something about her gallbladder and emergency surgery. Patricia would be out of commission for at least 6 weeks, which was basically the entire rehearsal period. "We're desperate," Rick admitted. "Everyone keeps saying you're the only person who could possibly step in this late." Melissa's first instinct was to say no. She had her students, her grading, and she'd promised herself some actual free time this spring. But the community theater had given her so much when she was younger. It was where she had discovered her own love for the stage before she realized teaching was her true calling. "Can I at least see the script first?" she asked, already knowing she'd probably say yes. 2 days later, Melissa found herself in the theater's cramped office space, surrounded by dusty props and the lingering smell of coffee. She flipped through the cast list, recognizing most of the names. The community theater was small enough that everyone knew everyone. That's when she noticed the glaring blank space next to the male lead character. "Wait, you don't have anyone for Thomas?" she asked, looking up at Rick and the 2 other board members who had joined them. The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. "That's another small issue," Rick admitted. "We had someone, but he got offered a role in a TV commercial shooting in Atlanta. He left yesterday." Melissa sat back in her chair, which creaked in protest. "So you need me to direct a play that opens in 6 weeks and you don't have a lead actor?" "We've called everyone we could think of," Linda, the board treasurer, said. "No one is available who can handle the part. It needs someone with presence." Melissa thought about the script she'd read the night before. Thomas was indeed a complex character. Charming but deeply flawed, funny yet vulnerable. He carried much of the emotional weight of the story. Without the right person, the whole production would fall flat. That's when an absurd thought popped into Melissa's head. Maybe it was the pressure, or maybe it was her brain's weird way of trying to find humor in a stressful situation. "My brother kind of looks the part," she said with a small laugh. The physical description in the script could be Daniel's biography. The room went quiet, and Melissa realized they were taking her seriously. "Oh no, I was joking. Daniel has never acted a day in his life. He's an accountant, for heaven's sake. He organizes spreadsheets and gets excited about tax code updates." But the seed had been planted, and Linda was already nodding enthusiastically. "Does he look like you?" "Because you have great stage presence. I mean, we share some features, but he's much taller, broader shoulders. Dark hair that never stays put. He has this sort of unintentional charm." Melissa stopped herself, realizing she was essentially describing Thomas from the play. "Could you ask him?" Rick leaned forward, hope glimmering in his tired eyes. "Just to read for it?" "No pressure." Melissa laughed again, this time with more force. "Trust me, Daniel would rather swim with sharks than get on stage. He doesn't even like giving presentations at work." But as she drove home that night, the idea kept tugging at her. Not because she thought Daniel would do it, he absolutely wouldn't, but because the mental image of her serious, numbers-focused brother attempting to play a romantic lead was genuinely funny. Daniel was washing dishes when she got home. They'd been sharing an apartment for the past 8 months ever since his divorce. It was supposed to be temporary, but they'd fallen into an easy rhythm that neither seemed in a hurry to break. "You're not going to believe what happened today," Melissa said, dropping her bag on the kitchen counter. Daniel raised an eyebrow, hands deep in soapy water. "Let me guess. One of your students finally performed Shakespeare without making it sound like they're reading a grocery list?" "Better. I got roped into directing the spring play at the community theater because Patricia had a medical emergency." Daniel pulled the plug, letting the water drain. "And you said yes because you don't know how to say no to anything theater-related." He wasn't asking a question. "Guilty," Melissa admitted. "But here's the kicker. They don't have a lead actor. And I kind of sort of mentioned you." Daniel froze, dish towel in hand. "You did what now?" "As a joke," Melissa quickly added. "I said you looked like the character description and they got all excited." Daniel stared at her for a long moment before bursting into laughter. Good one. For a second there, I thought you were serious. I was joking, but they weren't, Melissa said, grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl. They're desperate. No one who can actually act is available. Daniel's laughter faded. Wait, they actually want me to audition, me? The guy who got sweaty palms having to give a toast at his own wedding? I told them you'd never do it, Melissa assured him, taking a crunchy bite of her apple. Can you imagine, though? You on stage delivering emotional monologues and romantic lines? That's not funny, that's terrifying, Daniel said. But there was a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. What's the play even about? It's called Second Chances. About a guy who moves back to his hometown after his life falls apart in the city. He reconnects with old friends, finds new purpose. It's actually pretty good. Sounds a little too close to home, Daniel muttered, referring to his own return after his marriage ended. Their conversation might have ended there if not for what happened the next evening. Melissa had invited a few friends over, theater people she'd known for years. After a few drinks, she told them about the casting crisis and her joke about Daniel. Oh my God, that would be amazing, said Priya, who had acted alongside Melissa in several productions. Daniel has that perfect brooding look that community theater is always desperate for. I do not brood, Daniel protested from the kitchen, where he was pretending not to listen to their conversation. You're brooding right now, called out Jen, another theater friend. Come here and let us see you. Reluctantly, Daniel joined them, holding his beer like a shield. See? Perfect Thomas energy, Priya declared. Reluctant hero with hidden depths. I have no depths, Daniel insisted. I'm a shallow puddle of spreadsheet formulas and coffee. That's exactly what someone with hidden depths would say. Jen laughed. What started as gentle teasing slowly evolved into a genuine attempt to convince Daniel. By the end of the night, it had somehow transformed into a bet. Okay, how about this? Said Priya, eyes gleaming with mischief. If you can learn just one scene, one single scene, and perform it convincingly, Melissa takes over your chores for a month. 2 months, Daniel countered, surprising everyone, including himself. 1 month, Melissa bargained, but I'll also buy groceries. Daniel looked around at the expectant faces. Part of him knew this was ridiculous. He'd spent his entire life avoiding the spotlight. Even in school, he'd chosen activities that kept him firmly in the background. The very thought of getting on stage made his stomach twist into knots. But another part of him, a tiny, usually ignored part, was curious. What would it feel like to be someone else for a little while? To say things he'd never say? And honestly, 2 months without dishes or vacuuming was tempting. Fine, he finally said. 1 scene. But when I'm terrible, you all have to admit it was a stupid idea and no one brings it up ever again. Melissa looked at her brother with newfound curiosity. She'd expected flat-out refusal. This willingness, however reluctant, was completely unexpected. Deal, she said, extending her hand. As they shook on it, neither of them realized that this silly bet was about to change both their lives in ways they could never have imagined. For now, it was just a joke, a way to liven up a Thursday night with friends. But sometimes, the most important journeys begin with a single step taken almost by accident. And Daniel had just agreed to take that step, even if he was certain he'd stumble and fall. The morning after the bet, Daniel woke up with immediate regret. Sunlight streamed through his bedroom window as the reality of what he'd agreed to settled in his stomach like a cold stone. He groaned and pulled the pillow over his head. What have I done? He mumbled into the darkness beneath the pillow. The sound of Melissa humming in the kitchen drifted through the apartment. She sounded cheerful, too cheerful. Daniel knew that tone. It was her "I have plans for you" voice, the same one she'd used when convincing him to help build sets for her school plays or attend student performances he had no interest in. With another groan, he dragged himself out of bed. Maybe if he talked to her now, he could back out gracefully. It was just a stupid bet made after a few beers. No one would actually hold him to it. Melissa was pouring coffee when he shuffled into the kitchen, his hair sticking up at odd angles. "Good morning, future star of the stage," she said with a grin that was entirely too wide for this early in the day. "About that," Daniel began, accepting the mug she handed him. "I think we all got a little carried away last night." Melissa's eyebrows shot up. "Are you backing out already? The great Daniel Walker giving up before he even tries?" It was a cheap shot, using his competitive nature against him, and they both knew it. Daniel narrowed his eyes at his sister. I'm not giving up. I'm being realistic. I don't know the first thing about acting. That's why you have me, Melissa said, taking a sip of her coffee. Besides, you only have to learn one scene to win the bet. One scene, and then you're free from dishes for a month. Daniel sighed. When she put it that way, it didn't sound quite so terrible. Fine, but we're doing this here, not at the theater. No audience. Fair enough, Melissa agreed too quickly, which should have been Daniel's first warning sign. I'll bring the script home today. True to her word, Melissa returned that evening with a well-worn script in hand. They cleared the small living room, pushing the coffee table against the wall to create a makeshift stage area. Okay, so this is the scene where Thomas returns to his hometown after losing his job and his apartment in the city, Melissa explained, flipping through the pages. He runs into his old friend Olivia at the local diner. Who's playing Olivia? Daniel asked, suddenly nervous about having to interact with a stranger. For now, me, Melissa said, just for practice. Let's start with you just reading the lines. Don't worry about acting yet. Daniel took the script, his palms already sweaty. The stage directions described Thomas as disheveled, defensive, but with an underlying vulnerability. Daniel could relate to the disheveled part at least. Olivia, he read stiffly, I didn't expect to see you here. Is that how you'd say it if you ran into an old friend you hadn't seen in years? Melissa asked. Daniel frowned. I'd probably say hey and then try to escape to the bathroom. Okay, but Thomas isn't you. He and Olivia have history. They were close once. So were Thomas and I, came a voice from the doorway. Priya stood there with a grin, alongside Jen and Rick from the theater board. Daniel's eyes widened in horror. What are they doing here? Moral support, Melissa said innocently. And Priya is actually playing Olivia in the show, so it makes sense for you two to practice together. You said no audience, Daniel hissed. They're not an audience. They're fellow actors. Daniel shot his sister a look that promised revenge, but it was too late to back out now without looking like a coward. He straightened his shoulders and tried again, this time addressing Priya. Olivia, he said, his voice still wooden. I didn't expect to see you here. That's better, Melissa encouraged. Now try it like you're embarrassed to be seen by her. Thomas has just lost everything, remember? His pride is wounded. Daniel took a deep breath. He knew about wounded pride. After his divorce, he'd avoided friends for months, not wanting them to see him at his lowest. Olivia, he tried again, this time lowering his eyes slightly, his voice quieter. I didn't expect to see you here. The room went quiet. Daniel looked up to see Melissa and the others exchanging glances. That was actually not bad, Rick said, sounding surprised. Don't sound so shocked, Daniel muttered, but he felt a tiny flicker of something that might have been pride. For the next hour, they worked on the scene. Daniel remained stiff and self-conscious, but occasionally, when he forgot to be nervous, something genuine would slip through. Those moments made Melissa lean forward, watching her brother with growing curiosity. Let's take a break, she finally suggested, noticing Daniel's increasing frustration. Rome wasn't built in a day. And I'm not going to turn into an actor in an evening, Daniel agreed, grateful for the reprieve. As the days passed, their evening rehearsals became a routine. Sometimes it was just Melissa and Daniel, but often Priya would join them, and occasionally other cast members would stop by, curious about the newcomer. Daniel found himself thinking about Thomas during his workdays, wondering about his choices and feelings. It was strange to spend so much time in someone else's head, even a fictional someone. The key, Melissa told him one night, is to find where you and Thomas connect. What do you have in common? Daniel thought about it. We both had to start over when we didn't want to. We both came back to a place we thought we'd left behind. Melissa nodded encouragingly. Use that. Next time you say his lines, think about how you felt when you moved back here. The following evening, something shifted. Daniel wasn't great, not by any stretch, but when he spoke about Thomas's reluctance to ask for help, about his fear of being seen as a failure, there was a rawness that hadn't been there before. Where did that come from? Priya asked afterward, looking at Daniel with new respect. Daniel shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. Just thinking about stuff. A week into their practice sessions, Melissa sprung her next surprise. I think you're ready to try the scene at the actual theater, she announced over breakfast. Daniel nearly choked on his toast. What? No, the bet was just to learn the scene. And you've learned it, Melissa countered. But don't you want to see if you can do it on a real stage just once? The theater will be empty except for the cast and crew. That's still like 15 people, who are all rooting for you to succeed, Melissa pointed out. Come on, just try it. If it's horrible, you never have to do it again, and I'll still do your chores for a month. Daniel wanted to refuse. Every instinct told him to back away from this cliff edge before he was pushed over. But something else, something new and unfamiliar, made him curious. Could he actually do this? Stand on a stage and make people believe even for a moment that he was someone else? One time, he finally agreed. And if I hate it, that's it. The community theater was small but had always seemed massive to Daniel whenever he'd reluctantly attended his sister's performances. The stage loomed before him, the empty seats stretching back into shadows. The cast and crew milled about, pretending not to watch him too closely. Just like we practiced at home, Melissa assured him, squeezing his arm. Forget everyone else is here. Easier said than done. Daniel's mouth was dry, his palms damp. He could feel his heartbeat in his ears as he took his position on stage. Priya stood opposite him, offering an encouraging smile. Whenever you're ready, Melissa called from the third row. Daniel opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Panic rose in his chest. This was a mistake. He couldn't do this. He should just walk off stage now and accept the mockery that would follow. But then he caught Melissa's eye. There was no mockery there, just a steady belief that surprised him. She nodded slightly as if to say, I know you can do this. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, he wasn't Daniel standing awkwardly on a stage. He was Thomas, back in his hometown after his life had fallen apart, running into the girl who had once known him better than anyone. Olivia, he said, his voice softer than in rehearsal with a slight catch that hadn't been there before. I didn't expect to see you here. And just like that, the scene began to flow. It wasn't perfect. He stumbled over a few lines, and sometimes his gestures felt forced. But when Thomas spoke about his failures, about his reluctance to face old friends who had once expected great things from him, something real and vulnerable came through. When the scene ended, there was a moment of silence before the small audience burst into applause. Daniel blinked, pulled back to reality by the sound. That was not terrible, he admitted to Melissa afterward, trying to hide how pleased he felt. Not terrible, Rick repeated, joining them. Daniel, that was exactly what we've been looking for. That awkwardness, that reluctance, it works for Thomas. It makes him real. Daniel shook his head. It was just one scene. But you could do more, Rick pressed. Melissa, tell him. Melissa looked at her brother thoughtfully. The bet was for one scene, she said. And you've won it fair and square. Chore-free for a month. Thank you, Daniel said, relieved. But, she continued, I think you should consider taking the role. Not for me or for the theater. For yourself, Daniel laughed nervously. Why would I do that to myself? Because for 5 minutes up there you weren't thinking about work or your ex or bills or any of the things that have been weighing you down for months, Melissa said quietly. You were just present. Daniel didn't have an answer for that. Because the truth was, she was right. For those few minutes on stage, everything else had fallen away. And despite the terror, despite the awkwardness, there had been something freeing about it. I'll think about it, he finally said, which was more than anyone, including himself, had expected. 3 days passed before Daniel gave Melissa his answer. He'd spent those days in a strange state of distraction, running lines in his head during meetings and lunch breaks. Twice his coworkers had caught him talking to himself in the break room. He'd claimed he was practicing a presentation, but the truth was the character of Thomas had begun to take up residence in his mind. On Thursday evening, Daniel arrived home later than usual. Melissa was curled up on the couch, grading papers with a red pen and a frown of concentration. I'll do it, he said without preamble. Melissa looked up, her pen freezing mid-mark. You'll do what? The play. I'll be Thomas. Daniel set his laptop bag down and loosened his tie. But I have conditions. A slow smile spread across Melissa's face, but she quickly composed herself. Name them. First, you can't laugh at me, ever. Not during rehearsals, not backstage, not at home when I'm practicing lines. I would never. You absolutely would. Daniel cut her off. Second, if at any point I'm so terrible that I'm ruining the show, you have to be honest and let me quit. Melissa nodded solemnly. Fair enough. Anything else? Daniel hesitated. Yes, don't tell anyone this was supposed to be a joke. I don't want the rest of the cast knowing I'm only there because of a bet. This request seemed to surprise Melissa. She studied her brother for a moment, then nodded. Deal. As far as everyone is concerned, you were a last-minute casting miracle. I wouldn't go that far, Daniel muttered, but he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He'd been thinking about this decision for days, swinging between certainty that he was making a huge mistake and a strange, unexpected excitement. The next evening, Daniel found himself at his first full cast rehearsal. The community theater's rehearsal room was a large, open space with chairs arranged in a circle. People chatted in small groups, some stretching, others reviewing their scripts. They all seemed so comfortable, so at ease in this world that was completely foreign to him. Everyone, Melissa called, clapping her hands to get attention. For those who haven't met him yet, this is Daniel, our Thomas. All eyes turned to him. Daniel fought the urge to run. Hi, he managed, raising a hand in an awkward wave. Daniel is new to acting, Melissa continued, so let's all make him feel welcome. A woman in her 60s with short gray hair and kind eyes approached him first. I'm Judy, she said, offering her hand. I play Thomas's mother. Welcome to the family. One by one, the cast introduced themselves. Priya, who he already knew, Anthony, who played his childhood best friend, Leo, the diner owner, and several others whose names blurred together in Daniel's nervous mind. We'll start with a read-through, Melissa announced once introductions were complete. Everyone find a seat. The read-through was less terrifying than Daniel had anticipated. Sitting down, script in hand, he could almost pretend this was just another business meeting. When his turn came to read, he kept his eyes fixed on the page, focusing on the words rather than the people listening. That's good, Melissa said when they finished Act 1. But remember, everyone, this isn't just about saying the lines. It's about the relationships between these characters. They have history, connections. As we move forward, I want you to think about those connections. Over the next week, rehearsals intensified. They moved from seated read-throughs to on-their-feet work, blocking scenes and beginning to bring the story to life. Daniel struggled with the physical aspects of acting, where to stand, how to move naturally while remembering lines, what to do with his hands when he wasn't speaking. You're too stiff, Melissa told him after a particularly frustrating rehearsal. You move like you're afraid to take up space. I am afraid to take up space, Daniel admitted. I feel like everyone's watching me, waiting for me to mess up. They are watching you, Melissa said bluntly. That's the whole point of theater. But they're not waiting for you to fail. Everyone wants this show to succeed. Daniel wasn't convinced, but he tried to take her advice. At home, he practiced moving around their living room as Thomas would, with the slight hesitation of someone who had once been confident, but had lost his footing in life. Slowly, day by day, something began to change. The lines started to feel less like words on a page and more like thoughts in his head. His movements became less calculated, more instinctive. And most surprisingly, he found himself looking forward to rehearsals. 3 weeks in, they ran the scene where Thomas finally confronts his father about his childhood disappointments. It was the emotional core of the play, the moment when Thomas stops running from his past and faces it head-on. Daniel had been dreading this scene. Unlike the lighter moments or even the scenes with Olivia, this required a vulnerability he wasn't sure he possessed. His own relationship with his father had always been distant but cordial, nothing like the complex, painful bond between Thomas and his father. I don't know how to play this, he confessed to Melissa the night before they were set to work on the scene. I've never had this conversation with Dad. Maybe that's exactly why Thomas needs to have it, Melissa suggested. He's saying all the things you never said. The next day at rehearsal, Daniel stood across from Bill, the retired English teacher who played his father. The rest of the cast sat in a semicircle watching. This was a working rehearsal, which meant Melissa would stop them to give notes and make adjustments. Whenever you're ready, Melissa said. Daniel took a deep breath. In the script, the scene began with Thomas and his father working on fixing an old car, an activity they had shared when Thomas was young. The physical task gave them something to focus on besides their words, making the difficult conversation possible. Hand me that wrench, Bill said, fully in character as the gruff, emotionally distant father. Daniel passed him the imaginary tool, his movements now natural after weeks of practice. They worked in silence for a moment, the tension building. You know, Daniel began, finding Thomas's voice. "I spent years trying to be what you wanted." "And what was that?" Bill asked without looking up from the pretend engine. "Someone who never left. Someone who was satisfied with this town. This life." Daniel felt something shift inside him as he spoke, a connection to the words that hadn't been there before. "But I couldn't breathe here." "So you ran away to the big city," Bill said with a hint of bitterness. "How'd that work out for you?" Daniel felt a flash of genuine anger, surprising himself with its intensity. "At least I tried," he shot back, the words feeling like they came from somewhere deep inside him. "At least I didn't spend my whole life wondering what might have been." The scene continued, building in emotional intensity. Daniel forgot about the watching cast, forgot about Melissa taking notes. He was simply there, in that moment, having the conversation he'd never had with his own father, about expectations and disappointments, about the pain of never feeling good enough. When they reached the scene's climax, where Thomas finally breaks down and admits how much his father's approval still matters to him, Daniel felt tears stinging his eyes. This wasn't acting anymore. It was something else, something real and raw and uncomfortable. "Cut," Melissa said softly when they finished. Daniel blinked, suddenly aware of the room again. Everyone was staring at him with expressions ranging from surprise to admiration. He felt exposed, as if they had all witnessed something private. "Sorry," he mumbled, wiping at his eyes. "I got a bit carried away." "Don't apologize," Bill said, clapping him on the shoulder. "That's what we're here for, to tell the truth even when it hurts." Melissa approached them, her director's notebook clutched tightly in her hands. "That was—" She seemed at a loss for words, which was rare for her. That was exactly what the scene needed. Both of you. The rest of the rehearsal passed in a blur. Other scenes were worked on. Notes were given. But Daniel remained distracted, processing what had happened. He had accessed something in himself he didn't know was there. Something honest and painful and strangely freeing. As they were packing up to leave, Priya approached him. "That was incredible," she said quietly. "Where did that come from?" Daniel shrugged, embarrassed by the praise. "I don't know. It just happened. Well, whatever it was, hold on to it. That's what makes people want to watch, when something real is happening on stage." On the drive home, Melissa was uncharacteristically quiet. Daniel glanced at her, worried that he'd done something wrong despite the positive feedback. "What?" he finally asked. Melissa kept her eyes on the road. "Nothing. I'm just surprised that I didn't completely suck." "No," she paused, considering her words. "That you have so much inside you I never knew about." Daniel looked out the window at the passing streetlights. "Maybe I didn't know either." That night, lying in bed, Daniel replayed the rehearsal in his mind. He had always defined himself by what he wasn't. Not creative, not outgoing, not emotional. His identity had been built around being the practical one, the responsible one, while Melissa was the artistic free spirit. But today had shaken that foundation. If he could access those feelings on stage, what else might be buried inside him? What other parts of himself had he kept hidden even from himself? For the first time since agreeing to this absurd challenge, Daniel didn't feel like he was pretending to be an actor. He felt like he was discovering a part of himself that had always been there, waiting for the right moment to emerge, and it terrified him. 2 weeks before opening night, everything fell apart. The day began normally enough. Daniel woke early, rehearsed lines while making coffee, and headed to work. His co-workers had grown used to his distracted air and occasional muttering. A few had even bought tickets to the show, something that filled Daniel with equal parts pride and terror. "You're coming to watch me potentially humiliate myself in public," he'd told his office friend Tanya when she mentioned buying tickets. "That's either very supportive or slightly sadistic." "I'm betting on the first one," she'd replied with a grin. "Besides, everyone's curious. Our quiet accountant suddenly a thespian. It's the most exciting thing to happen in this office since the copy machine caught fire." The memory of that conversation played in Daniel's mind as he sat through a budget meeting, nodding at appropriate intervals while mentally running through his most difficult scenes. By lunchtime, he'd convinced himself that he was ready. Nervous, yes, but ready. Then his phone rang. It was Melissa. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "The theater flooded last night. A pipe burst in the bathroom." Daniel stepped away from his desk, lowering his voice. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough." The stage is soaked and there's water damage to some of the set. Rick is talking to insurance now, but they're saying repairs will take at least 3 weeks. But we open in 2, Daniel said, feeling a strange mix of dread and, was that disappointment? I know. We're having an emergency meeting tonight to figure out options. Can you come straight from work? Daniel agreed and spent the rest of the afternoon in a fog of worry. Part of him, a larger part than he wanted to admit, had been looking forward to the performance. After weeks of rehearsal, after pushing through his fear and finding something unexpectedly meaningful in the process, the thought of the show being canceled left him hollow. The cast gathered that evening in the lobby of the theater, the only dry area in the building. The mood was somber. Several people had brought coffee and snacks, preparing for a long discussion. Daniel noticed Priya's red-rimmed eyes and realized she'd been crying. Rick, the board president, looked exhausted as he addressed the group. I won't sugarcoat it. The damage is extensive. The stage needs to be completely redone and several walls have water damage. What about pushing the opening back? Someone suggested. We could, Rick admitted. But we'd lose our slot in the community events calendar. There's the summer festival after us, then the children's theater program. We'd be looking at a 3-month delay. The news hit hard. 3 months meant losing the momentum they'd built. Some cast members might not be available by then. The energy and emotion they'd created together would dissipate. What about another venue? Melissa asked. Could we perform somewhere else? Rick shook his head. I've called everywhere I could think of. The high school auditorium is being renovated. The community center is booked solid for a conference. The church basement isn't big enough. The group fell into discouraged silence. Daniel found himself scanning the room, looking at the faces that had become familiar over the past weeks. Judy, who brought homemade cookies to every rehearsal. Anthony, who had helped Daniel with his lines countless times. Bill, who had become something of a mentor to him. The thought of not finishing what they'd started together felt wrong. What about the old barn at Willow Creek Park? The words came out of Daniel's mouth before he fully formed the thought. All eyes turned to him. The park? Rick repeated. Daniel nodded, warming to the idea. The historic barn. They renovated it last year for events. It's huge, and it has that rustic feel that would actually work for our show. Thomas comes back to a small town, right? What's more small town than a barn? A murmur of interest spread through the group. That might actually work, Melissa said slowly. But we'd need to completely rethink the staging, the lighting, and get permits, Rick added. Plus figure out seating, ticket. But it's possible, Daniel pressed. He surprised himself with his intensity. When had this become so important to him? The discussion erupted with people talking over each other in excitement and concern. Lists were made, calls were placed, tasks were divided. By the end of the night, a plan was forming. Rick would contact the parks department first thing in the morning. The set designers would visit the barn to take measurements. Everyone would need to adjust to a new space, new challenges. As the meeting broke up, Melissa pulled Daniel aside. That was a great idea, she said, studying him with curious eyes. I didn't expect that from you. Daniel shrugged, uncomfortable with her scrutiny. It just made sense. No, it's more than that. Melissa tilted her head. You really care about this show? Well, I've put a lot of work into it, Daniel said defensively. We all have. Exactly, Melissa agreed with a small smile. We're all in this together now, including you. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. The Parks Department approved their use of the barn. The set was redesigned to fit the new space. Rehearsals moved to the park with the cast working in the open air until the barn was ready. Daniel threw himself into the preparations with unexpected energy. He helped carry set pieces, stayed late to run lines, even volunteered to help with publicity. His normal life, work, home, routine, faded into the background as the play consumed more and more of his time and thoughts. Then, exactly 10 days before opening night, panic hit him like a physical blow. He was in the middle of rehearsing the climactic scene with Bill when his throat tightened and his hands began to shake. The lines he knew by heart vanished from his mind. Sweat broke out on his forehead and the barn seemed to spin around him. I can't, he gasped, stepping back. I can't do this, and Daniel. Melissa moved toward him, concerned. What's wrong? Everything. The word came out too loud. This whole thing is insane. I'm not an actor. I'm an accountant who got roped into a bet, In 10 days, actual people will pay money to watch me. Friends, coworkers, strangers. What if I freeze? What if I forget everything? What if they laugh at me? The words tumbled out, giving voice to fears that had been building beneath the surface of his growing confidence. The entire cast watched in awkward silence as he unraveled. "I'm sorry," he finally said, grabbing his jacket. "I need some air." He strode out of the barn into the cool evening, his heart hammering in his chest. The park was quiet, with only a few dog walkers in the distance. Daniel found a bench overlooking the small lake and dropped onto it, putting his head in his hands. What had he been thinking? This wasn't him. He didn't take risks, didn't put himself out there to be judged. He'd built his life around safety and predictability, and now he was about to stand in front of hundreds of people and bare his soul. He wasn't sure how long he sat there before he heard footsteps approaching. He expected Melissa, ready with a pep talk or tough love. Instead, it was Bill who eased himself onto the bench with a slight groan. "Knees aren't what they used to be," the older man commented mildly. Daniel didn't respond, too embarrassed by his outburst to meet Bill's eyes. "First show?" Bill asked after a moment of silence. Daniel gave a short laugh. "First anything like this?" Bill nodded as if this confirmed something. "I remember my first time on stage. Community production of Our Town back in 1978. I threw up twice before the curtain went up." This made Daniel look up. "Really? But you're so confident?" "Now sure. After 40-odd years of doing this." "But that first night?" Bill shook his head. "I was convinced I'd make a fool of myself. And you know what? I did forget a line. Stood there like an idiot for what felt like hours but was probably 3 seconds. Then my scene partner gave me a cue and we moved on. The world didn't end." "That's not exactly reassuring," Daniel muttered. "It's not meant to be. It's meant to be honest." Bill turned to face him directly. "Everyone in that barn is scared of something. Judy's afraid she'll miss her cues because her memory isn't what it used to be. Anthony's worried his family will think he's wasting his time with theater instead of real work. Priya's terrified of emotional scenes because she cries too easily." "And Melissa?" Daniel asked, curious despite himself. "Your sister?" Bill smiled. "She's afraid of letting everyone down. Taking over this production last minute, dealing with the flood, moving to the barn, she feels responsible for all of it." Daniel hadn't considered this. He'd been so caught up in his own journey that he'd forgotten Melissa was on one too. "The point is," Bill continued, "fear is part of the process. It means you care about doing well. It means this matters to you." Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering. "It does matter," he finally admitted. "I don't know when that happened, but it does. Of course it does. You've put yourself into this character. You've worked hard. You've connected with all of us." Bill stood, his knees cracking. "So the question isn't whether you're scared. We all are. The question is whether you'll let that fear stop you." He held out his hand to help Daniel up. "Now are you coming back in there to finish this scene? Or am I telling everyone our lead has abandoned ship?" Daniel looked at the outstretched hand, then up at Bill's face, unkind but uncompromising. He thought about the past weeks, about the unexpected connections he'd made, about the parts of himself he'd discovered through becoming Thomas. Slowly, he reached up and took Bill's hand. "Let's finish the scene," he said. As they walked back to the barn, Daniel felt the fear still churning in his stomach. But alongside it was something else. Determination, perhaps. Or the simple knowledge that running away now would mean losing something precious he'd only just found. Melissa was waiting at the barn door, worry etched on her face. When she saw them approaching, relief flooded her features. "I'm sorry," Daniel said before she could speak. "I panicked." "You're allowed to panic," she replied, "as long as you come back." And he had. That was the important part. Whatever happened on opening night, whether he soared or crashed, at least he wasn't giving up. "From the top?" he suggested, stepping back into the barn to face the waiting cast. It wasn't confidence he felt as he took his position on the makeshift stage. It was something more complicated and more valuable. Courage. Opening night arrived with the gentle warmth of early summer. The old barn at Willow Creek Park had been transformed over the past week. Rows of rented chairs filled the main floor. Christmas lights were strung across the high beams, creating a canopy of twinkling stars above the audience. The makeshift stage, wooden platforms borrowed from the high school, was set with minimal but effective props. The space that had once housed hay and farm equipment now held the dreams and fears of 20 amateur actors. Daniel stood behind a partition that served as backstage, peering through a crack at the arriving audience. His stomach churned as he watched people filing in, more people than he'd expected. He recognized faces from work, from the neighborhood, from Melissa's school. They chatted excitedly, programs in hand, looking around at the unusual venue with appreciation. "Stop torturing yourself," Priya said, appearing beside him in her first scene costume, a waitress uniform for the diner where her character worked. "It never helps to watch them come in." "I'm just trying to get used to them being there," Daniel replied, but he stepped away from his viewing spot. In truth, each new arrival had sent another jolt of panic through him. The backstage area buzzed with activity. Melissa moved between actors, offering last-minute notes and encouragement. The volunteer makeup artist touched up faces under the unforgiving lights they'd rigged. The sound technician tested microphones, his voice echoing through the barn before being hastily shushed. 5 minutes, everyone," Rick called, consulting his watch. 5 minutes to places. The announcement sent a fresh wave of terror through Daniel. He closed his eyes, trying to remember the breathing exercises Judy had taught him during one particularly stressful rehearsal. A hand touched his arm. He opened his eyes to find Melissa standing before him, her expression a mix of concern and pride. "Hey," she said softly. "How are you holding up?" "Barely," he admitted. "I keep forgetting the first line of the play, and it's literally just, 'Excuse me, is this seat taken?'" Melissa smiled. "You won't forget it when the moment comes." "What if I do? What if I walk out there and just stand like an idiot while everyone stares at me? Then I'll come save you," she promised. "But you won't, you know why?" Daniel shook his head. "Because you're not going out there as Daniel, my nervous accountant brother who got roped into a bet. You're going out there as Thomas, who's coming back to his hometown after years away. Thomas, who's nervous about seeing old faces and answering uncomfortable questions." Daniel blinked. She was right. His fear could become Thomas's fear. His discomfort could become the character's discomfort. "Use it," Melissa continued. "Everything you're feeling right now, the fear, the doubt, the worry about what people will think. Thomas feels all of that too. Let it fuel you, not stop you." Before Daniel could respond, Rick's voice called again. "Places, please. Curtain in 2 minutes." Melissa squeezed his arm. "You've got this. And no matter what happens out there tonight, I'm already so proud of you." The simple sincerity in her voice steadied him. This journey had changed something between them. The sister who had always seen him as predictable, practical Daniel now looked at him with new eyes. And perhaps he thought he was looking at himself differently too. "Thank you," he said, "for forcing me into this." "Forced?" Melissa raised an eyebrow. "As I recall, you agreed to a bet. A bet I never thought I'd follow through on, but you did. And here we are." She gave him a quick hug. "Now go find your mark. I need to check on the others." Daniel moved to his starting position behind the set. The play began in the diner, with Thomas returning to town and encountering Olivia for the first time in years. He would enter after the lights came up, after Priya had established her character at work. His heart pounded in his chest as the barn lights dimmed. A collective hush fell over the audience. Then a spotlight illuminated the diner set, and soft background music began to play. The show had begun. Priya moved across the stage, wiping down tables, checking the prop coffee machine. She looked completely at ease, as if she truly were a waitress at the end of a long shift. Daniel marveled at her ability to transform so completely. He heard his cue line, Priya sighing dramatically and saying, "Another thrilling Friday night in Paradise Falls." This was it. His entrance. His legs felt wooden as he stepped onto the stage, moving into the pool of light. The audience came into focus. Dozens of faces turned toward him, waiting. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Is this seat taken?" Priya turned, her character's casual glance transforming into stunned recognition. Thomas Walker?" And just like that, they were off. The scene unfolded just as they'd rehearsed it countless times. But there was something different now, an energy that flowed between the actors and the audience, a living circuit of attention and emotion. Daniel felt it the first time the audience laughed, a genuine response to the awkward humor of the reunion scene. He felt it even more strongly during the tense exchange with Bill playing his father. When the older man delivered a particularly cutting line, someone in the audience gasped audibly. They were invested. They cared about these characters. The first act flew by in a blur of adrenaline and focus. Before Daniel knew it, they were at intermission, the lights coming up as the audience broke into enthusiastic applause. "They like it," Anthony whispered as they hurried backstage. "They actually like it." The second act brought the emotional core of the story. Thomas confronting his past, rebuilding relationships, and ultimately deciding whether to stay in the town he'd once been so desperate to escape. By the time they reached the final scene, Daniel had forgotten to be nervous. He was simply living in each moment, responding to his fellow actors with an authenticity born from weeks of work and discovery. When he delivered Thomas's closing monologue about finding home in unexpected places, about second chances and new beginnings, the words resonated with his own journey of the past 2 months. "Sometimes," he said, looking out over the hushed audience, "the thing you're running from is the very thing you need most. And sometimes the hardest part isn't starting over, it's admitting that you want to." As the final spotlight faded and the barn plunged into darkness, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the audience erupted into applause that seemed to shake the old wooden beams above them. The cast lined up for curtain call, each actor stepping forward for their individual bow. When Daniel's turn came, the applause swelled, accompanied by cheers and even a few whistles. He felt a rush of something he couldn't quite name, pride perhaps, or simple joy at having faced his fear and found something valuable on the other side. After the final group bow, the house lights came up, and the audience began to move toward the makeshift lobby. Cast members hurried to change out of costumes and join them for the opening night reception. Daniel was removing his stage makeup when Tanya from work appeared at his side, her eyes wide with surprise. "I had no idea," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "You were amazing." Before Daniel could respond, others crowded around, colleagues, neighbors, friends of Melissa's. They offered congratulations, asked questions about the rehearsal process, expressed amazement at the transformation of their quiet accountant friend into the compelling character they'd just watched. Daniel answered their questions as best he could, still riding the high of the performance. When someone asked how he'd gotten involved with the production, he caught Melissa's eye across the room. She gave him a small smile and a nod as if to say, "Your story to tell." "It started as a joke, actually," Daniel admitted. "Melissa needed someone for the role and I was convenient." "A joke?" the person echoed in disbelief. "But you're so natural up there." Daniel shrugged, surprised to find he wasn't embarrassed by the truth. Sometimes the best things start in unexpected ways. Later, as they cleaned up the reception area, Melissa found him stacking empty cups. "So," she said, leaning against the table, "how does it feel to be a star?" Daniel rolled his eyes. "Hardly a star, but it feels good, really good, actually. The review guy from the local paper was here," Melissa mentioned casually. "I overheard him talking to Rick. He used the word revelation about a certain first-time actor." "Stop," Daniel protested, but he couldn't help smiling. "I'm serious." He was impressed. We all were. Melissa studied him for a moment. "So does this mean you'll audition for the fall production?" The question caught Daniel off guard. He hadn't thought beyond tonight, beyond the culmination of this unexpected journey. Would he do this again? Put himself through the stress and fear and vulnerability? Risk failure in front of an audience? But then he thought about the other side of the equation. The connections he'd made, the parts of himself he'd discovered. The exhilaration of that final applause. "Maybe," he said, surprising himself with the answer, "if there's a good part for an accountant with slightly less stage fright than before." Melissa laughed. "I think we could find something suitable." As they finished cleaning and prepared to leave the barn, Daniel took one last look at the empty stage. 2 months ago, he'd agreed to learn a single scene to win a bet, convinced he would be terrible and everyone would laugh at him. He couldn't have imagined then where that decision would lead, to new friendships, to surprising self-discovery, to standing in front of a crowded room and holding their attention with nothing but his words and presence. The bet that had started it all seemed insignificant now, a tiny seed that had grown into something neither he nor Melissa could have predicted. "Ready to go?" Melissa asked, holding the door open. Daniel nodded, following her into the warm night air. The audience had long departed, but he could still feel the echo of their applause, the warmth of their reception. He had entered that barn as one person, and was leaving as someone slightly different. Still Daniel, still an accountant who liked order and predictability, but now also someone who knew he could take risks and survive them, someone who could step into another's shoes and find pieces of himself there. "By the way," he said as they walked to the car, "you still owe me a month of doing the dishes." Melissa laughed, the sound carrying across the empty park. "Worth every plate," she said. "Absolutely worth it."